Verstappen just did something so controversial, the FIA changed the rules before Japan even started. Not next season. Not after a vote. Immediately. Because what happened in Australia, and then exploded in China, pushed one of the best drivers in the world to say something nobody expected. That these new cars don't feel natural. Don't respond like a Formula 1 car should. And at high speed, they can actually work against the driver. Now think about that. A 4-time world champion saying the car goes against instinct. That alone is enough to shake the entire sport. But here's where it gets even more serious. The FIA listened. And they didn't just acknowledge it. They changed how qualifying works. Less energy per lap. More pressure. More eliminations. And suddenly, one mistake can end your weekend. Just like that. Which means Suzuka is no longer just a race. It's a completely different game. Where drivers have less control. Less margin. And nowhere to hide. But here's the part nobody is talking about. This change could either unlock Verstappen completely, or expose Red Bull even more. And there is one hidden consequence of this new rule. That could decide who takes pole in Japan. Subscribe now, because what's about to happen in Suzuka changes everything. We are just days away from Suzuka. And suddenly, qualifying is no longer what it used to be. Because this change is not cosmetic. It's not a small adjustment. It completely alters how drivers approach a lap. How they prepare. How they take risks. And most importantly, how they fail. Now think about what qualifying has become in this new era. It's not just about pushing flat out. It's about managing energy. Saving battery. Deploying at the perfect moment. Holding something back for the final sector. And that changes how drivers think. It turns instinct into calculation. Reaction into management. And that is exactly what Verstappen attacked. Because for him, that is not racing. That is controlling a system. Now the FIA steps in. Reduces energy recovery per lap. Forces drivers to rely less on deployment. And more on pure driving. And that sounds simple. But it changes everything. Because now, you cannot hide behind the system. You cannot compensate for a weak corner with extra energy later. You cannot rely on perfect deployment to save a lap. If you make a mistake, it stays. And that creates pressure. Real pressure. Now add the new elimination format. 22 cars. 6 eliminated in Q1. 6 more in Q2. That means 12 drivers are out before the final session even begins. Half the grid. Gone. And with less energy available, those margins become even tighter. Because now, every lap matters more. Every corner matters more. Every small instability in the car becomes a real threat. And this is where things get dangerous for Red Bull. Because their issue is not just speed. It is consistency. A car that sometimes behaves. And sometimes doesn't. A rear that can surprise the driver. A system that doesn't always respond the same way twice. And in a format like this, that is a nightmare. Because qualifying is no longer about building up. It is about delivering immediately. No room to adapt. No room to experiment. You either get it right, or you are out. Now here is where it becomes personal. Because Verstappen didn't just trigger this change. He now has to prove it benefits him. Because if the system is reduced, if energy matters less, then everything shifts toward raw driving ability. Car control. Confidence. Precision at the limit. And that is his territory. But here is the risk. Because if the car is still unpredictable, if the rear still behaves strangely, if the balance is not perfect, then removing the system does not help. It exposes. And Suzuka is the worst place for that. High-speed corners. No margin for hesitation. No space to correct mistakes. So now everything is aligned. A rule change. A driver who pushed for it. A car that is still unstable. And a track that punishes every weakness. And that leads to one unavoidable question. Did Verstappen just give himself an advantage? Or did he remove the only thing that was helping him survive qualifying? But here is where the real consequence begins. Because this change does not just affect how fast a lap is. It affects when that lap happens. And that is something most people are completely overlooking. Because before this, drivers could build up, manage energy across multiple attempts, feel the car, adjust, find the limit step by step. But now, that progression is gone. Because with less energy available, you cannot afford multiple imperfect laps. You don't have the luxury of learning. You have to deliver immediately. And that transforms qualifying into something much more aggressive, much more unpredictable. Because now drivers are forced into a decision. Push early and risk everything. Or hold back and risk elimination. And in a grid of 22 cars? with 12 drivers eliminated before the final session. That decision becomes brutal. Now think about what that means at Suzuka. Because this is not a stop-and-go circuit. This is a rhythm track. A flow track. Where confidence builds through the lap. Corner after corner. Speed increasing gradually. And if that rhythm is broken, the entire lap collapses. So now drivers are being asked to do something unnatural. To go from zero to maximum commitment. Without that build-up. Without that progression. And that is exactly what Verstappen was talking about. Instinct. Because when instinct is disrupted, the driver hesitates. Even for a fraction of a second. And at Suzuka, that fraction is everything. Now here is where things connect in a way that changes the entire picture. Because Red Bull's biggest issue is not just energy. It is confidence. A car that does not always respond the same way. A rear end that can surprise the driver. Moments where control is not fully predictable. And in a format where you only get one real chance, that becomes critical. Because if the driver cannot trust the car instantly, the lap is compromised before it even begins. So now the situation becomes almost paradoxical. Verstappen pushed for a system that rewards pure driving. But pure driving requires trust. And trust is exactly what the RB22 has been lacking. Now add one more layer. Traffic. Because with more cars, more eliminations, and fewer effective laps, the track becomes crowded at the worst possible moment. Drivers going out at the same time. Trying to find space. Trying to avoid dirty air. Trying to create the perfect gap. And with less energy to recover time, getting blocked even slightly, can end your session. So now qualifying is no longer just about the car and the driver. It is about timing, positioning, risk management in real time. And that is where chaos begins. Because one mistake from another driver, one poorly timed out lap, one unexpected slowdown, and your entire weekend is compromised. And here is the part that changes everything. Because this environment favors drivers who can adapt instantly, who can commit without hesitation, who can deliver under pressure with no preparation. And that is exactly why Verstappen wanted this. But it also creates a final, unavoidable reality. If he gets it right, he dominates. If he gets it wrong, he is out. And there is no middle ground anymore. No recovery. No second attempt. Just one moment. One lap. One chance. And at Suzuka, that is all it takes to decide everything. And now, everything leads to the moment that will define this entire story. Not the rule change. Not the controversy. But what happens when the lights go green and there is nowhere left to hide? Because qualifying will give us the first signal. But the real impact will be felt in the race. And this is where things become even more dangerous. Because this new approach to energy does not just reset qualifying. It changes how drivers arrive at Sunday. How much they push the car. How much stress they put into the system. How much confidence they carry into the race. Because if qualifying becomes more aggressive, more intense, more unpredictable, then the cars arrive on race day already pushed closer to the limit. And for Red Bull, that is a problem. Because their weakness is not just performance. It is sustainability. A car that can reach the limit, but struggles to stay there. A system that can deliver, but not always for long. We have already seen it. Moments of speed, followed by moments of vulnerability. And now, with less reliance on energy management in qualifying, drivers are forced to extract more from the car itself. More load, more stress, more demand on systems that are already fragile. And that carries into Sunday. Now imagine this. Verstappen delivers a perfect lap in qualifying. Finds the limit instantly. Takes advantage of the new format. Starts at the front. Everything looks exactly how he wanted. But then the race begins. Long runs. High temperatures. Continuous stress on energy systems. And the same question returns. Can the car sustain it? Because this is where the real contradiction appears. The rule change favors pure driving. But the race still depends on system stability. And if Red Bull has not fully solved that, then the advantage disappears. Lap by lap. Slowly. Until it's gone. Now here is the final layer. Because this is not just about Red Bull. This affects everyone. Mercedes. Ferrari. Every team on the grid. But not all teams are in the same position. Some already have stable systems. Consistent energy deployment. Predictable behavior. For them, this change is an opportunity. Because it removes variables. Simplifies execution. And rewards precision. But for Red Bull, it is a test. A brutal one. Because now there is no buffer. No system to mask weaknesses. No extra energy to compensate mistakes. Just the car, the driver, and the track. and Suzuka, will expose all of it. So now everything comes down to one final truth. Verstappen forced the change. He challenged the system. He pushed for a return to pure driving. But in doing so, he may have removed the only layer that was protecting him. And when qualifying begins, we will see it. Not in words, not in theory, but in one single lap, where instinct takes over, where hesitation disappears, and where the truth about this car finally reveals itself. And this is where everything finally connects. Because this was never just about qualifying. It was never just about energy. And it was never just about one driver speaking out. This is about control. Who has it? Who loses it? And who can survive without it? Because for years, Formula One has been moving in one direction. More systems. More management. More layers between the driver and the car. And slowly, the driver stopped being the only factor. But Verstappen saw something early. Something dangerous. A point where the car starts deciding more than the driver does. Where instinct becomes secondary. Where reaction becomes delayed by systems. And that is where he pushed back. Not just as a competitor, but as someone who understood what was coming next. Because if the sport continues in that direction, the best driver is no longer the one with the best control. It is the one with the best system. And that changes everything. So this rule change, this sudden adjustment before Suzuka, is not random. It is a correction. A forced one. And that is why it happened so fast. Because when the sport itself starts to feel unnatural, it has to react. Now here is the part that brings everything together. Because Suzuka is not just any circuit. This is the track where drivers prove who they really are. High-speed commitment. Precision without margin. Confidence without hesitation. There is no system that can replace that. No energy deployment that can save you mid-corner. No software that can correct instinct. It is pure driving. Exactly what Verstappen was demanding. So now, the entire grid is entering a weekend where the balance has shifted. Slightly, but enough. Enough to expose differences.